Welcome back from that short break. And if you have just joined us, we are discussing political dialogue and political competition, whether this is a myth or reality for Uganda. Before we broke off, our panelists had shared some really insightful thoughts. And last year, we saw Uganda's biggest opposition political party, the National Unity Platform, decline to join IPOD, with claims that the platform has largely been used by the regime to legitimize a brutal regime that has no respect for democracy. We have also, over time, had threats by FBC to boycott the platform. Fred, what do you have to say about these parties being hesitant in joining IPOD? Fred, please unmute.
Yes. Sorry about that. Thank you, Liz, and thank you, fellow panelists, for the views so far shared. I would call this kind of situation a hide and seek kind of game, which is not productive at all. It doesn't help anyone, but of course it has its reasons. Looking back at the foundation of the space we are discussing, looking at iPod as a space, what is the foundation like? How strong is this foundation? Was it established in a way, in a manner that could allow all people with all parties with different political views to be accommodated, or was it developed depending on the characters that were around then? When they face these challenges, what are they doing actually to rectify this? Like I did say, and Abel did allude to that, dialogue is very, very delicate, particularly in a nascent democracy like ours. It is even harder. But also there are other factors that make it even very hard. And one of those factors is what has the message that has just been shared through that drama, that leadership is a service, not a privilege. But in Uganda, leadership is a privilege. As long as we still have that scenario, dialogue becomes very, very hard, because nobody is going to negotiate himself out of Luombo. Nobody will go on a table to negotiate how to throw away his plate. Okay? You don't expect that. But if leadership was looked at as a service, where one goes to contribute to society in a political perspective, then that is different. It is easy to negotiate. It is easy for one to bring their ideas, and they are respected, where even if they are minority views, they would be respected, because the whole agenda, the whole issue is not to outsmart the other, is not stopping you from accessing your next meal, but it's about making the country better. So I think looking at that, I talked about the aspect of language. All these issues come about because of some of these factors. Okay, we have had statements like "my oil." I mean, these are very unfortunate statements. Okay, these are very unfortunate statements. Even some opposition leaders make statements that leave you wondering and say, "What are we dealing with? Where is this country headed to?" For any dialogue process to happen, even how you refer to each other is important. Can our politicians refer to themselves as colleagues of alternative interests? Okay? Can, let me be very specific now. Can Honorable Chagulanyi look at His Excellency President Yoweri Museveni as a colleague of alternative interest? Can they refer to each other in that language? The day we will begin hearing such language used by our national politicians, then we will know we are headed in the right direction. You did ask a question before the break, whether we have seen dialogue work for Uganda. I think, yes, we have had dialogues here, but every time there has been a dialogue, there have also been scheming at the back of the dialogue. I remember in 1985, during the Nairobi peace talks, General Tito Okello, the government of the Okellos was negotiating with the rebel group led by Museveni, then now the president. They were negotiating in Nairobi. After signing the peace agreement, there was a public rally at State Square. I attended in person. And what was the statement that the president made? He said, Museveni ni nyoka, lakini leo tumetoa meno, meaning that the person they have been negotiating with is a snake of which they have now removed the teeth. Can you imagine? The very day they signed the peace agreement in Nairobi, when he arrived in the country, he addressed a public rally at Constitutional Square. It was called State Square then. And I was there in person. I heard his words myself. I did not read in the papers. But interestingly, on the other side, the rebels were not actually negotiating. They were simply buying time. Immediately after that, Masaka was blocked off. And from the guerrilla war, we went into an open war. And that's how the Okello government lost it. So, talking about dialogue in Uganda, because it is about winner takes it all. It is about, it is now our time to eat. It's not about the country. The country always becomes secondary. This is the biggest problem, and this is why dialogue is not thriving in this country. Back to you, please.
Thank you so much, Fred, and thank you for sharing some of that information that we would have probably never have known of. And what you raised is really interesting. It's why have opposition political parties in Uganda failed to distinguish between regime and country, Henry? Fred talks about people it's time to eat. Everyone is struggling for their time to eat. So we often hear opposition parties saying when their time comes. Why do you think they have failed to distinguish between regime and the country's interests?
Thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you, Fred, for those insightful views. Earlier on, there was a comment by Felix Vian that leadership, dialogue, is one of the signs that would show you that a country's leadership has matured. And by a leadership maturing, it takes you to what Fred earlier on said again, when he talked about leadership as a service. In our country, people don't go into leadership to serve. They go there to fulfill and achieve selfish interests. And because they go into positions of leadership for selfish interests, they fail to see the bigger picture. So to the question you've asked, when you look around, all opposition political parties, including the new that is purporting they were not going to sit to join IPOD in order to sit on the same table with M7, who has been oppressing, kidnapping, detaining, and harassing, and also killing their own supporters. You get the idea that there is a failure by the leaders of these political parties to make a clear distinction between the regime and the country. Because if you went into leadership, if you went into political space to serve the country, you would then have known as a Chagulanyi or Amuriat or any other political party leaders that leadership politics is a contestation of ideas. It's a contest. And therefore, also in politics, it is not possible that the one holding political power is going to give it out on a silver platter. Therefore, there's going to be a contestation, there's going to be a fight. And therefore, because the one who is in power is also owning the instruments of coercion, you would expect him to leverage that power and use them in his or her favor. And therefore, when you start to contest and challenge this person, these are the things you expect. I would assume that these leaders of political parties go through a session called scenario building. And therefore, when you face the wrath of this leader who is in power, who did not come to power through elections, you would expect this. And therefore, for them to keep insisting that they cannot sit with themselves, you get the impression that there is a way, a sense in which they are obsessed with Museveni, the man. Yet, the one they want to serve is the country. And I think the day they will learn to draw the line between Museveni, his regime, because this regime is also in the evening of its stay. They tell us, our grandfathers in Africa, that even the longest snake has a tail. And once the tail has arrived, then you know the snake has passed. So for any meaningful leader, you would imagine that they put country interests first, that when the interests of the country come into the picture, then the issue of Museveni has done this to us doesn't arise. Therefore, you understand that it is of no consequence to boycott joining IPOD, because IPOD is a platform for dialogue. Dialogue is a marathon. It takes time, it takes leadership, it takes tolerance, it takes resilience, it takes determination. This is the time for them to demonstrate by word and deed that they are actual leaders. But by saying we are not coming to dialogue, and the reason, Museveni, you get to see that they have clearly failed to separate and to draw a clear distinction between regime and country. And I would appeal to the leaders of these political parties to understand that leadership is a service, that the service is to the country, and that even if it were them in the shoes of Museveni today, they would have done what they did. But they need to tolerate and be resilient. I have always said that the political leaders of today are so weak because our grandfathers who fought for independence across Africa faced a far more ruthless machine or enemy in form of the colonial machinery than these ones are facing in Museveni and the NRM regime. So all they have to do is to understand, number one, that dialogue is a marathon. You don't say that IPOD, the idea that K was introduced 10 years back, has not achieved anything, and therefore we have no justification to join. The outcome, the fruits of dialogue could be seen 50 years from today. And therefore, for them not to see this is really appalling and annoying. The other thing is that democracy is a constant work in progress. So all the time you should have actors that are ready and willing to hang in there and keep pushing. Okay? So this snake they are looking at, that is, they are saying is biting them, also has a tail. So the tail will come and go. But can we see them putting country first and drawing a clear distinction. Because I've been appalled when they go out of Uganda, the way they speak about Uganda, you see, they transfer their, dislike and hatred for the regime. They transfer that to the country, and they speak as bad about the country Uganda as they speak about the regime. And I think the day this will happen is the day we shall begin to show it to see leadership. And therefore, my point is that it is wrong for our leaders of NUP and FDC to refuse to engage in this dialogue, because this dialogue is not from seven or their parties. It is dialogue for the citizens. It is dialogue for the country. And anybody that wants to be seen as a future leader of this country should be able and willing to demonstrate by word and deed that they can engage in dialogue. Back to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Henry. However, I'm sure you've heard the assertion by the public that says that the regime and the state seem to be one. So, can you really fault Noob for thinking the same? It's really difficult in this era that we are in to differentiate between the state and the current regime. What do you have to
Thank
say
you very
about
much,
that?
Lisa. The reason they call people leaders and others subjects is because you, as a leader, you should transcend over and above common talk, common perceptions, traditions, and so on. And therefore, whereas it is true that Museveni is the regime and the regime is Museveni, the party is the government, and the government is the NRM, the bigger picture tells us that everything, and this is a natural law, everything that has a beginning must have an end. There must be an end to this regime, like it or not. Upende uspende. There must be an end. And therefore, for you to keep fronting as an excuse a regime that is in the evening of its stay, I think it is a failure to exercise leadership. Once again, we want them to have a bigger to be able to demonstrate that they're able to project this country over and above the regime, and that the regime should not be used as an obsession. And by making the regime an obsession, they are failing to see logic and see the bigger picture. Back to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Henry. So, Abel, Uganda has one of the youngest populations in the world, with about 78% of its population below 30 years. We, however, don't see these young people, and women inclusive, on the iPod table. Who is representing their interests? And can the youth entrust the old people to represent them?
Thank you, Lisa. This goes back to the kind of political parties we have in place. We know that political parties are supposed to be nursery beds that nurture leaders that will take up the leadership positions of the country in the future. But we often see that most of these political parties have been turned into personal enterprises that do not even nurture leaders that should come over and take over the leadership mantle of the country. That's why you see that most of the youth and women have been blocked, or there are certain barriers that are in place that are blocking them from coming up and participating in some of these processes where political parties are engaging in. So the privileges are left for a few, as we all know. A few individuals within those political parties want to eat everything, and they're excluding some of the youth and the women from participating in this dialogue. But one way I believe that the youth and women could participate in this process is they should demand, they should not even just wait for these political parties and the leaders who are in there for their own selfish benefits and interests to close them or leave them out whenever they're having this process of dialoguing. They need to demand to be in those spaces. They need to push back and ensure that they are in those spaces, regardless of some of the barriers within the political parties. We have seen that these guys have mastered the art of facing the positions for themselves, either by introducing laws that block away the youth and women, or commercializing the entire internal political processes of their political parties, so that they are the only ones who are eligible or who can go through the processes, and they leave out the young people and the women from participating. So the youth need to come up, wake up, and also the women need to wake up from their comfort zones, and they push back and demand for changes maybe in some of the processes in those political parties, so that they can be able to participate, to go through and be leaders in some of the spaces which require them to participate in some of those spaces. Because I do know there's no political party in Uganda that has so far a very youthful or young secretary general who goes into and negotiates with others for the benefit of the youth. So if iPod is really a space where even the youth, which are the majority, are supposed to be part, they should be seen participating in such spaces. They should not just wait to be ready for things which some other people have agreed upon. How will you know the interests of the youth if the youth does not participate? How will you know the interests of the women if women are closed from those spaces? So I do believe it's high time, as political parties which have the responsibility of nurturing leaders. One way of nurturing leaders is making sure that they should participate through those processes. If they don't participate, how will they learn? And how will they become leaders who are transformative in nature, who can bring about development in the country if you're blocking them out? And if you have a few privileged individuals who are using political parties to amass their own wealth instead of fronting the interest of Ugandans. So I think it's high time youth and women start demanding to participate in those spaces.
Yes, thank you, Abel. Thank you for that. And it is indeed high time that we, the youth, took up those spaces. So, Fred, Henry earlier mentioned the dynamics in our African culture of how, as a subject, you cannot dialogue with a king. And that brings me to my next question. Can a party in a disadvantaged position have meaningful dialogue, especially looking at our dominant party syndrome here in Africa? Most times we have dominant parties over the smaller parties. Can they have meaningful dialogue?
Yeah, thank you, Liz. Yeah, going straight to the question, I believe it is possible if the dialogue is well structured, and if this political party is well prepared and organized, if they have issues to articulate, issues to present, because in a dialogue, you bring what you have on table, I bring what I have. It is a workshop of ideas. Now I'm talking in an ideal situation, an ideal dialogue situation, where you have a competent facilitator and where the participants actually have respect for each other. So whether this party is disadvantaged, they still carry their own heads. They still have their own ideas. They have worked out something. And if this they have is for the good of the country and they bring it to the table, everybody will appreciate them. Everybody will say, yeah, you know, when Noop actually went to iPod, they did suggest A, B, C. But because these parties who were already there could not swallow what they presented, they could not actually take it on. But we believe that's a good idea. And that would be a score on their side. But staying outside, we don't get to realize how good you are. How do we know this is not just an excuse for you not to undress yourself in public to show your weakness in terms of engaging? So this is what I think, that as national political parties, they should have national agendas. Actually, one thing they should begin doing, if I were one of them, I would pass it like a rule that nobody should talk about President Museveni as a person anymore. If political parties did that for 2 years, where none of them actually talks about him, but talks about Uganda and what they believe, what they think, and what they are planning for the country, just to convince us, to show us that yeah, they are looking beyond the man, because the man will definitely go at one point. But this country will be here, for years to come. So I think the mindset, okay, the mindset has to change. Their approaches have to get better. Their strategies have to be improved, because we can't continue listening to the same song that FDC was singing, now is Noop singing. We get bored.
Yes,
Can we?
Fred, I'm going to have to cut you short there. Our time
Yes,
is
please.
running fast. Yes, so
Okay.
if you could kindly wind up.
Wind
Yes.
up. Yeah. So let's get a new song. Let's get a new approach from these political parties. Disadvantaged as they are, they can still do something about this situation. Over to you,
Thank you.
Liz.
Thank you so much, Fred. Henry, kindly give us your concluding remarks. Our time is fast spent.
Thank you, Lisa. My parting shot is that Uganda has everything to gain when it goes down the path of dialogue. We want to see dialogue at political party level. We want to see dialogue at national level. We want to see dialogue in homes, dialogue in institutions. Dialogue is the only way we are going to nurture and grow our democracy. We have tried violence before. Violence has not helped us. We now want to pursue democracy as the most viable system of governance. So dialogue is the way forward. Back to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Henry. Abel, please give us your parting shots before we go.
Thank you. All I want to tell the political parties, they need to understand that political power is always competed for, and through the competition of this political power, there are always very many things that happen. There are always disagreements. They always have issues that come arise through that competition for power. So the only way they can address such differences so that they can come up with solutions that can help the country grow is through dialogue. So regardless of what happens, political competition and political dialogue has to always move hand in hand. We shouldn't ignore it.
Thank you so much, Abel, and thank you, all our panelists. It's been a really interesting conversation. I also want to thank the viewers that tuned in, all those that sent in comments, and I hope to see you next week, same time, same place. God bless you.